Please take your seat. Our program will now begin. Veuillez prendre place. La séance va maintenant commencer. Por favor, tomen asiento. Comenzaremos con nuestro programa ahora.
Would I get a clicker for this? Would I get a clicker for? Or if not, it will be just flash by that, is it?
Or we can say next slide, or we can give you a clicker.
Okay, you can give me a clicker here.
First, thank you all for staying with us during the lunchtime and sacrifice your lunch and to join the side event. I have a short message from the Secretariat for our remote participants that although you can see a interpretation button on the Zoom, actually there is no interpretation during the side event. Thank you very much for your understanding.
But if not, it's fine. I can just see next slide. It's better? Okay.
All right, thank you.
So it's just okay. All right. Yeah. Good afternoon, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this side event on the food safety consideration for the manufacturing of cell-based food co-organized with China. I'm Adeline from the Singapore Food Agency. So over the next 15 minutes, I'll provide an overview of what cell-based food are, how they are being produced, and the food safety considerations that have emerged as this sector developed globally. And then we will hear from our expert panel on these challenges. Yeah, so to begin, what is cell-based food? So cell-based food refers to food produced through the culturing cells isolated from animals, and this would include your poultry, bovine, porcine, fish, and crustacean sources. And you may also hear terms like cultivated meat, cell-cultured meat, or lab-grown meat that is being used interchangeably. So unlike the traditional meat production where we raise animals, entire animals to maturity, cell-based food production isolates animal cells from a small piece of tissue and culture them in bioreactors. So these cells grow in the cell culture media, which is a complex mixture of salt, sugar, vitamins, amino acids, and other necessary nutrients that's required for cell growth. So then the harvested cells are then processed into food products. So this represents one of the innovations under the new food sources and production system umbrella that Codex has been discussing. So let me just provide you with some brief context on how this topic has evolved at Codex. So in 2021, FAO and WHO first presented on these new food sources and production systems at CAC 44, sparking discussion on how Codex should address these emerging innovations. So after consultations with members countries, CAC concluded that the current Codex mechanism are sufficient and encourage members to submit new work proposals on specific topics where guidance is needed. So since then, there has been a growing recognition on the importance of Codex working in a flexible and timely manner to address these NFPS. In short, we have seen increased engagement through side events and technical discussions, and most recently at CCFA, Singapore and China submitted a discussion paper on the development of guidelines for assessment of cell culture media and also co-organized a side event as well. So the committee noted that the need to consider the guidelines on cell-based food and agreed to form an electronic working group to further develop the project document. So the cell-based food sector is no longer theoretical. It's becoming a commercial reality. There are now over 195 companies working in this space globally, and hence we think that this discussion is timely. From a regulatory perspective, we are seeing progress. There are companies that receive approvals from various countries, including US, Israel, Singapore, and also Australia. And also several other jurisdictions are also actively reviewing their safety assessment. And this includes the European Union, Republic of Korea, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, just to mention a few. Perhaps most significantly, manufacturing facilities are also being established, or they are in the planning stage in these following countries. So this widespread development across multiple regions would mean that regulators worldwide are also grappling with the similar questions about how to ensure safety of these products. So here is the production of the cell-based food that is adapted from the FAO paper 2023. So it's actually very important to understand that cell-based food production isn't a single standardized process. There are significantly variations across the production chain, which create challenges for regulators. So as illustrated in this diagram, each variation can present its own food safety considerations that regulators need to understand and address. So this complexity raises questions about how to develop safety frameworks that are both comprehensive and flexible enough to accommodate innovations. So for example, if you were to focus on the cell sourcing, companies may be using different cell cultures or different cell types, and also sourcing methods. And on the second stage, in terms of cell preparations and storage, it can also involve various cell banking approaches and also employing different bioreactor systems and techniques. And also, for example, if down the line in terms of the cell production, producers may also incorporate scaffolds to provide these three-dimensional structures, or they can use different variations like using particular pluripotent stem cells, or even 3D printing to add to the entire process. So here, let me just walk you through a typical production process in details using an example that we have seen so far. So for my case, I will try to classify these into three main stages for you for the ease of understanding. So under stage one, which is the one in orange, is actually cell banking. Cells are isolated from healthy verified animals and used to create master cell banks and working cell banks. So these are cryopreserved for a long-term storage at ultra-low temperature. So where we are looking at like, it will be like less than -80 or below. So the cell banking process follows protocols similar to those that's used in pharmaceutical manufacturing to ensure consistency, traceability, and safety. For the second stage, which is the one in dark blue, which is the cell expansion. So the frozen cells from these working cell banks will be thawed and grown in culture media that is usually rich enough for the cells to grow. And they are expanded through multiple passages, scaling from a small laboratory flask to an industrial bioreactor that can hold thousands of liters. So throughout this expansion phase, operators continuously monitor parameters such as your cell density, viability, pH level, and also conduct regular contamination checks. And for the last stage, which is the one in light blue, on harvest and processing. So once sufficient cell mass is achieved, cells are separated from the culture media, typically through centrifugation. And then they are mixed with food-grade ingredients for texture or flavor, and then processed in a controlled environment. And then finally, the product is packaged and stored under appropriate conditions. So throughout this entire process, the challenge is maintaining sterility. The nutrient-rich culture media that support the cell growth can also equally support microbial growth if contamination occurs. So just let me share a little bit about Singapore's experience in regulating cultivated meat or cell-based meat manufacturing facilities. So when we assess facilities producing cell-based food locally, we found that traditional food facilities requirements still apply. For example, your proper hand washing facilities, appropriate equipment, adequate storage, and also general food production infrastructures. However, in addition to that, we identified some additional considerations specific to cell-based food. And then this would include like I mentioned earlier, some ultra-low temperature storage facility capable of maintaining the cell bank at -80 and below. So designated cell cultured room with appropriate environmental controls to prevent contaminations, designated media preparation areas to avoid cross-contamination, and also appropriate storage for sterile equipments and tools. So what we learned is that while traditional food safety principles remains relevant and foundational, they don't fully address all the aspects of this production method. And we found ourselves looking at practices from pharmaceutical manufacturing as a reference, particularly around aseptic processing, environmental monitoring, and contamination controls, and considering how to appropriately adapt them for food production contexts. So this raised an interesting question for us, like what level of control is actually necessary and appropriate for food safety? And how do we balance pharmaceutical grade practices with food production realities? So I think these are the questions that we regulators are now facing. So based on the regulatory experience from Singapore and also discussion with colleagues from other jurisdictions, several manufacturing characteristics distinguish cell-based food production from conventional food manufacturing. So one of these includes like your facility requirements that present the first challenge. So many regulators find that clean room standards may be necessary. Segregated areas for different production stages will help to prevent contamination, and also controlled air pressure differential prevents airflow from less clean to a cleaner area. Production practices requires aseptic cell culture techniques throughout the process. So in addition to all this, for example, your cell banking protocols may also need to ensure consistency and traceability. With the continuous monitoring of the bioreactor's condition is also necessary because these parameters can change rapidly and affect your cell growth and also leading to food safety issues. So on the third aspects of it, which is your personnel training, that can present another consideration. So staff will need to train beyond this traditional food hygiene, and they will need to have understanding on how the clean room operates, gowning procedures, aseptic techniques, and also how to recognize and prevent biological contaminations. But the question comes in, what kind of levels of training is actually appropriate? So lastly, in terms of the manufacturing characteristics that we have identified, waste management presents some challenges as well. So we are dealing with biological materials that may require specific decontamination protocols before disposal. Many facilities may also need to manage both conventional food production area and cell culture areas within the same site. So therefore, you may have to consider about requiring a careful segregations and cross-contamination controls. So after all, sharing all these manufacturing characteristics for cell-based food, we know that these practices aren't entirely new. They are actually well established in pharmaceuticals and biotechnological manufacturing. But the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is to determine how to appropriately adapt them. What is necessary for food safety versus what might be overly burdensome. So this is where international dialogues and potentially international guidance could be valuable. So here, coming back to the same diagram, in addition to these manufacturing practices, after our discussion with regulators globally, we actually identified several other areas where greater harmonization and clarity could be beneficial. So for the first one, in terms of cell line development, what are the appropriate standards for cell sourcing? So how should cell lines be characterized, and what constitute the adequate cell documentation? And these are like some of the questions that we actually think about for cell line development. For the second part, in terms of the input use, it also presents some safety assessment challenges because we know that cell culture media is very complex. It has a lot of nutrients or inputs such as your growth factors, processing aids that may not have been used in food production before. So what kind of safety assessments are needed, what kind of purity standards, and etc. But as I mentioned earlier in my slides, an EWG was created at the CCFA 55 to actually further develop on this project document. On the last part is actually, the one in blue is actually the manufacturing practices that we're actually looking at this moment. But the last one is actually on terminology. So we understand that terminology is fundamentals because different countries, different companies, or even scientific publications are using different terms. As you see in the first slide, where there are people who use cultivated meat, cultured meat, etc. This creates confusion in regulatory discussion, scientific literature, and international trade. But what should we actually call them? So, of course, at the moment, we are addressing food safety of this cell-based food. So a working definition is used at the moment to just be consistent with the FAO and WHO definition. So with this, I've provided an overview of the cell-based food, how they are being produced, and some of these food safety considerations that have emerged. So, but these are the complex issues that benefits from multiple perspectives and expertise. So today we have assembled a distinguished panel that will bring together international organizations, scientific expertise, industry perspective, and also some regulatory experience from the different regions. And today, let me have the privilege to introduce the panel. So we have Dr. Jeffrey Lejeune from FAO, and Dr. Juliana de Oliveira Mota from WHO, Professor Li Chunbao from Nanjing University of China. So they will be the one that's offering some scientific and technical expertise. So Ms. Mackenzie Battle from the Good Food Institute USA will be representing the industry perspective. And on the regulatory side, we have Dr. Junten from Singapore Food Agency. So our panel will be moderated by Ms. Claire Houting from China. So now, Claire, I'll hand it over to you to moderate our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adeline, for your very comprehensive introduction of the cell-based food production. And let's begin our panel discussion. And as Adeline just introduced all our panelists, I will just skip this part. And as far as I remember, Codex has begun its discussion on the new food and production system, I think dating back to 2020 in the 44th session of COC. And I think, among all the NFPS, the cell-based food has offering a new way to support the security, food security, and also the sustainability. And these products hold great promise, but also raise new food safety considerations. As Codex is launching its new turn of Codex strategic plan from 2026 to 2031, to deal with this emerging issue by providing guidance in this area, it is important that science, that regulators, and industry move together. That's why we have this panel discussion. And then, I will have my first question to Professor Chunbao Li. Well, from your perspective, what are the potential food safety concerns associated with cell-based food? And from your perspective, how far is it for the cell-based food from lab to the market?
Thank you, Chair, for your questions. Good afternoon, everybody. I come from Nanjing Agricultural University. Before answer your question, I would like to tell you that we just established new pilot lines with 2,000 liters last week. So it's a very good news in China. In terms of potential food safety concerns, I think the primary food safety risk in cultured meat production system might be chemical and physical contaminations. For microbial contamination, maybe it is the most common risk factor, including bacteria, fungus, mycoplasma, or viruses. Such contaminants may cause production failures, and if not well controlled, pose direct food safety hazards. Chemical contaminations is usually derived from disinfectant, detergent ratios, and volatile component entering through filtration systems. For physical contamination, it's mainly derived from workers and tools, including hair and microplastic particles. To mitigate these risks, producers should operate the production in very clean environment, comparable to pharmaceutical standards. Examples ISO Class 4 for core areas, and implement rigorous safety plans. Industry standards mandate protocols like HACCP, GMP, and GCCP systems to identify and control hazards. Regulatory assessment, as seen in Singapore and the US, result oriented, ensuring the final products are safe rather than prescribing every detailed production step. In terms path to wider commercialization, the industry is transiting rapidly from research and development to early marketing entry. Since 2020, regulatory approvals has accelerated significantly. To date, 10 companies across 5 countries, example, Singapore, the US, Israel, Australia, and the UK have gained market clearance, with the US leading by approving 5 companies. Notably, 6 new products were approved in 2025 alone, indicating strong regulatory momentum. At the moment, products are available primarily in limited values. For example, just the restaurants. The main barriers to mass market commercialization remain achieving cost parity with conventional meat and scaling up production capacity efficiently. Given the current pace of regulatory expansion and the technological advancement, the industry is projected to move toward wider commercialization within the next 3 to 5 years as production costs decrease. In my personal viewpoint, it's time for us to have common regulatory guidelines to meet the demands for the rapid growth of cultured meat industry, which is a new stretch for sustainable food supply. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Professor Li. And well, according to your answer to this question, we see that, well, the chemical and microbiological contamination are the major concern for the food safety issue on the cell-based food. And you also mentioned that in some markets, in some countries, people have already had the chance to taste some of the cell-based food, and it has already go from the lab to the market. So it's amazing. And this brings another question to maybe to our food safety regulators, because these foods, cell-based foods are already there in the market. And before they go to the market, they also have some post-market authorizations. And well, my next question is to Dr. Chen. And what guidance, from your perspective, what guidance would be useful from Codex to manage the food safety risks from the production of cell-based food, and what element will be most critical to include?
Thank you. Thank you, Claire, for the Thank you, Claire, for the question. Right, and perhaps I might just start my speech as to first acknowledge that many delegates in this room, probably this is the first time that you're seeing cell-based food production. But as you know, if you have heard Prof. Lee, right, so the reality is that cell-based foods are already on the market. Whether we like it or not, you know, it's like insects, it's here in the market. So it's not exactly as novel as we think. Right, at this point, I also like to point out the excellent work, the significant work done by FAO and WHO, who over the years have actually published several reports providing significant scientific advice on cell-based foods, right, specifically in identifying hazards related to the production of cell-based foods. And with that, Codex actually needs to take a forward-looking approach in proactively addressing these hazards. So over the years, Singapore has also been organizing roundtables for novel foods, and we have also been actively engaged in discussions such at other platforms such as the Science and Food Safety Dialogue, you know, initiated by Australia and South Korea and several other countries as well, and also the Asia Pacific Food Regulatory Authority Summit hosted by South Korea, the Advisory Network of International Regulators organized by the United Kingdom, and also it's a permanent team in world-renowned conferences such as the IFP and CFSQ. So focusing on the microbiological hazards, you know, through these discussions, we observe that we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, right? Existing Codex hygiene principles actually apply as well. It's very relevant. So the most important question is how to actually apply it in an unfamiliar environment, production environment. So this forward-looking approach will allow us to anticipate safety issues before they arise, as highlighted by the reports from the FAO and WHO, so ensuring that we are prepared as the industry grows. That being said, I mean, there are actually a few specific areas that I want to highlight. I mean, it's not exhaustive. There are several areas that is already highlighted by my colleague Adeline Yong in her presentation, but I'll just mention a few. Right, so the first area that I wanted to emphasize is in the cleanliness zoning and environmental controls. So today in companies, we are actually seeing a wide spectrum, a diverse spectrum of approaches. So on one end of the spectrum, we are looking at facilities that operate, you know, in ISO 8 clean room environments with controlled particulates, positive pressure, defined clean zones. On the other end of the spectrum, there are also facilities that operate in the much less stringent food processing type environments. And there's currently no international reference for what type of environmental controls are appropriate for cell-based food production. Right? So Codex does not actually need to mandate such pharmaceutical standards, and it may not be appropriate and may not reflect the diversity of production models associated with this very broad category of foods. But Codex can actually help regulators understand how to apply hygiene zoning concepts across this range of foods, how to manage airflow directionality to avoid cross-contamination, what types of environmental monitoring are appropriate, and how to maintain hygiene product flows through controlled spaces. This will actually give regulators clarity without forcing every facility into a pharmaceutical standard. And I also wanted to mention here also that these are not new concepts. We have seen similar applications in the code of hygienic practice for powdered infant formula, as you know, delegates are very familiar with. The second area that I wanted to probably bring it up again is in aseptic handling and transfers. There are several processing steps, such as bioreactor inoculation, media preparation, sampling and harvesting, and these actually require protection from cross-contamination. Again, also we are not talking about new hazards, it's just a new context in which established hygienic principles can be applied. And Codex guidance can help regulators understand what proportionate controls look like during these steps without prescribing any technologies. And the third area, which is in the area of materials and inputs for cell-based foods that differ from traditional foods. I will not elaborate this in detail because this has been covered in much detail in parallel. Another side event is in the CCFA, right? But I'll just mention that there are actually media components, supplements, and scaffolding materials that are being used in the production of cell-based foods that is very different from traditional foods. And Codex can actually provide practical, high-level guidance on what to look for when assessing these materials. And this will actually help regulators evaluate new food products as they enter the market without creating rigid and prescriptive rules. All right, so I've actually mentioned quite a bit, but just in summary, the key message that I wanted to bring across, it's really what regulators need most right now is clarity on how established Codex hygiene principles apply in a production system that uses different equipment, materials from conventional foods. And this will actually ensure an appropriate level of consumer health protection without being too prescriptive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. I think, thank you very much for your answer. I think you mentioned that, for example, the environment control and also the cross-contamination, these are not new ideas to the kind of hygienic practice. But in the new context of cell-based food production, I think that is why we need the guidance from the Codex to how to apply to those guidance on the guidance on the practice, hygienic practice to those new contexts. And also thank you very much for mentioning so many kind of dialogues and activities held in the member countries to discuss this issue. And my third question will be for Dr. Battle, and from the perspective of industry, how would Codex guidance benefit industry's commercialization and address uncertainties in these emerging sectors, the cell-based food?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your question, and I'm really happy to be sitting on this panel. For anyone who's not aware of the Good Food Institute, we are a global nonprofit focused on catalyzing the growth of the cell-based, plant-based, and fermentation-enabled food industries to contribute to food security, just for context. And to answer your question about how Codex guidance can benefit industry commercialization, I think there's 4 main points I'd like to make. First, Codex guidance can provide a really valuable point of entry for both regulators and the industry. So for regulators approaching cell-based foods for the first time, Codex guidance can be their first point of reference. And for industry to have the same point of entry and the same perspective will help increase the efficiency of the regulatory process and help in a way that benefits both regulators and companies. Second, Codex guidelines and standards can be a path towards international harmonization on cell-based foods, which will eventually facilitate the smooth trade of these products. And that's critically important for the capability of the industry to eventually expand beyond their respective domestic regions. Third, Codex guidance can benefit the industry by remaining risk-based, grounded in the best available science, and critically flexible, especially at this point in time. It's essential for international guidance on cell-based foods to leave room for the industry to continue innovating. Since it's such a new industry, although products are already at market, companies are constantly refining their production processes and their final product, and regulators have to refine their regulatory methods in response to that innovation. So to avoid unnecessarily impeding innovation and to avoid impeding progress already made by regulators and companies on this, flexibility in these standards is critical. Finally, and as others on this panel have also alluded to, Codex should identify what existing guidances can be applied to cell-based foods and where the gaps do exist. And I think Singapore did a good job of pointing that out earlier. While cell-based foods do utilize novel inputs and in some cases novel production methods, several of the processes used to ensure the safety of these inputs and the safety of the final product are similar or identical to existing safety processes used to ensure the safety of other types of food products that have been on the market for a long, long time. And so acknowledging that overlap helps to avoid otherizing cell-based foods in any unnecessary way, and also ensures that Codex isn't unnecessarily duplicating work and focusing most on the critical gaps. And new work proposals, such as the one brought by Singapore to this committee that are flexible and risk-based, are the best way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. I think the 4 point is pretty clear that when the guidance can be a point of reference and enhance the harmonization and will remain some flexibility for you to apply. And also also I echo what Dr. Chan has just said to apply the guidance in the new context. Yeah, and well, then I turn to the other side of my table and for the FAO and WHO. And I know that FAO and WHO has done, and also Codex has done a lot of work on the cell-based food. And you have been, very actively engaged in the, with some member countries on the cell-based food when they are doing their own regulations and doing their own research. Now, looking ahead, what strategies can be employed to reach the member countries that have not yet addressed this issue? We know that some countries already have some kind of basis of research and some studies on that, but some countries are not. And how can we build capacity among member countries to tackle these unique food safety challenges of cell-based food production? I think lady go first. So, Dr. Mora.
So thank you for inviting FAO and WHO to be in this panel, because as you said, we have been working intensively on this topic, because with the pressure that we have on the food production systems, with the growing population in the world, and also the environmental impacts, we need to look at all the solutions that can be an opportunity to relieve all this pressure. So, as you said, FAO, WHO, they started to work on this, and we had in 2022 the first meeting to look at the food safety aspects of this cell-based food. So we had the chance to have the experts on the field, academia, industry, and also other organizations that are interested in this topic to discuss about the food safety aspects. So we can find all the conclusions of this meeting in a report, the food safety aspects of cell-based food report, where experts come out with hazard identification and also analysis on how to control the potential hazards that are in this type of food. And what came out is that we don't have enough information to go further and to establish a risk assessment, because these products are not really available in the market if we have some market validations. And so to build capacity to engage with the countries, what we need is this international cooperation. We need a sharing of information, available information, in terms of production systems, but also on how countries that are already facing this challenge on how to regulate this kind of food, to change the information on how they deal with this, what are the main challenges, and how they deal with this. So we need to have this platform where countries can be actively engaged on these questions, and our FAO colleagues, they have one technical working group, an informal technical group, where they exchange this kind of information with the WHO that is actively involved. So this is one of the tools that member states can use to get more information, because here the countries can discuss about the challenges in regulatory terms. We can also encourage this international collaboration by building partnerships by countries that have experience and maybe accompanying countries that don't have this experience yet, but are willing to have this experience. We need to train risk assessors, laboratories, policymakers, and so on, and inspectors. And most importantly, we need to have a clear communication and a transparent communication in order to build trust among all the stakeholders and also among the consumer, because at the end, it's up to the consumer that relies the acceptability or not of this product. And I think the main point is communication, collaboration. And we are, of course, fully engaged with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the important idea is that the sharing information and experience is very important, and communication is also critical while identifying the gap. What are your needs and what we can offer? And I think the Codex can offer a good platform, as you mentioned. Maybe you can have some expert committees, but Codex can also offer a good platform for communication and collaboration. Yeah, thank you. And Dr. Lejeune.
So one of the pitfalls of being the last to speak is everybody said most of the points. I commend you for being here and learning about this new food. In a sense, the train metaphorically has spoken on cell-based food. It's not we're going to stop it. It is moving forward. So we need to address it, the safety issues, if they are there. Is that impossible? No. I mean, we have a framework. The risk analysis framework gives us the tools on how to address the threats. We can use risk assessment to identify the hazards. We talked about some of these hazards already. They're not new hazards. We talk about microbiological hazards. We talk about potential chemical hazards, or maybe there's some radiological hazards ends up there somewhere. I don't know. Physical hazards. Maybe there's something ends up in the reactor that ends up in your... Yeah, so we know how to deal with that. And then we can go ahead and characterize those hazards. The exposure assessment is a little bit more challenging because we don't have the data, right? And that's where it requires the collaboration and coordination with the manufacturers, regulatory authorities, academia, to kind of put those pieces together. And then you can come up with what the risk characterization is. Now, I was sitting here listening to this story, and it's funny how our lives take these trajectories that you never know where you're going to end up. And working at FAO, my colleague, Masami Takuchi, is usually the lead on the cell-based food, but we all have some input on what's going on. And I was thinking back 40 years ago when I was working in a virology lab and we're culturing cells, because we were trying to amplify and isolate viruses. So what you do is you either try to immortalize cells, or you get immortalized cell lines, you amplify them and grow them. And I'm thinking, sitting here, I'm like, 40 years ago, as a starving graduate student, why didn't I think about eating these? You know, every student wants, cheap food. But anyways, I know what it takes on a small scale, how to grow cells, and this issue of microbial contamination. Yeah, I had my share. You come in the next morning and you expect to see this nice lawn of beautiful cells, and all you get is like a broth culture of bacteria that stinks, right? Your cells are gone, your whole batch is gone. So there is some truth in this self-selection for microbial contamination in cell lines. You can't rely on that, though. I mean, we have self-selection in animal production. You get a highly virulent strain of salmonella that goes through a dairy farm, and it can kill calves, right? Then that's the end of your production, right? So we have to use a systematic approach for risk assessment, okay? Now, the second component of this risk analysis is, and this is why you're here, is the risk management aspect, okay? We will provide, to the extent possible, in collaboration with others in academia, industry, the data that we think that these are the risk factors and these are the higher risk factors and these are the control measures. And then you, as a group, and you've already done this, believe it or not, your general principles of food hygiene go a long, long way to prevent contamination of food as you go through the production system. And there might be other little tidbits of information here or there from other things, because these are not new hazards, right? We know that you just need to keep food clean, right? So you think about that. So you can't go away yet. 2 reasons. One, we have another side event on Wednesday that addresses the 3rd principle of the risk analysis paradigm. And this is what we talked about right here. Risk communication. Now, in my opinion, what I see the biggest challenge right now is not the risk itself, but is the perception of the risk is almost higher than the risk. And when it relates to this amplification of risk because of unknown factors. Well, it's new, we don't know. And then people get scared of it, right? So we need to make sure we include that 3rd factor of an effective risk communication in the process moving forward. Communication between the risk assessors and the risk managers. We're answering the right questions that you have. Communication between us in this room and those that are outside the room, right, wondering what we're scheming up and trying to poison them with, right? But it is a need to have this open and transparent and documented risk communication. I mean, I think back, and I'm almost done here, the idea of irradiation of ground beef to make it safer, right? I think we could get an agreement in this room that that really makes ground beef safer. But consumers are concerned that if they ate it, you know, at best, they would turn into Spider-Man, or at worst, they would end up glowing, right, and be radioactive themselves, right? So, and I don't know that we ever got over that. And I don't know what the challenge there was, but we need to also learn from our past experiences, GMOs, cloned meat, or cloned animals, I guess would probably be a better word, and see where we can maybe improve our communication to move this forward, along with the management practices that are going to protect the consumer and make trade fair, and also have a decent data to base those assessments on as we move forward. So there's just a few things to think about.
Thank you, Dr. Ajern. I think, well, we all agree that our aim, our core idea is that you just say that we should keep the food clean and safe. And how do we get to that destination is maybe we can, well, use the guidance and to get to that destination. And the other question is about the communication between us. I mean, the risk assessors and risk managers, and you say outside the meeting room, the consumers, how can we communicate and get the kind of harmonize the perception of these ideas? And I think that is also very, very important, especially in the area of codex. And with that, I think I will have the last question for our audience, because you have heard the answers from our panelists. I have one question for you. Do you have any, well, looking forward, do you have any suggestions at the global level and the next step recommendations to help ensure the consistent guidance at global level that protects consumer health and also facilitates the fair international trade in the cell-based food? Any volunteer? Okay, we have one from Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, great. this has been a very interesting side event. Thank you very much, and has clarified a lot of things for me. As I was saying earlier, one of the things, because I'm an independent NGO that represents many parents and mothers and consumer organizations, and we don't take any corporate money. So for us, this is really important. The whole thing about having Codex and the trust that's placed in Codex, really taking this seriously about whether these products are safe. And what the last speaker said was very important. I mean, the consumers are very worried, but on multiple grounds, because the push is to make sure that we actually encourage people to have whole foods. We don't, the general idea about food and health is not to go into an ultra-processed or a complicated processed food, which is what these cell-based foods are, but to simplify your diet and use really normal, minimally processed fresh fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts. So you have that problem in that it's going cell-based foods, even though they might capitalize on the environmental things, and they do use that whole thing about being more environmentally friendly, but there is a problem there. And because you actually are going in a different direction to what most of the health advisors are saying, and then when you factor in One Health, you're actually looking in a different way as well. So it's a complicated thing, and I think it's quite natural for the public to be wary of these products. And I would like Codex to be really careful before it gives a green light, because where we're coming from, babies and young children, a lot of the emphasis on the baby foods, some of them do talk about cell-based, and it's really, really problematic. Parents have no idea what this means and are very, very worried about, or very beguiled by it, and will go for it. Either way, it can go either way. But a lot of those products are undermining breastfeeding, which is the lifesaver for so many children. So you've got a real problem on your hands. And I'm just going to raise it. I would love to see any safeguards coming from an independent source. I do not want the regulators involved. You know, they can discuss with industries, but not to take funding from them. And then you might have some more trust from the general public. It's very, very important that this trust is not misplaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka. And I think our colleagues from FAO have a comment on your intervention.
Thank you for that comment. In the risk analysis paradigm, we understand that there needs to be communication, but there also has to be a decent separation between risk managers and risk assessors, so that they're not unduly influence one and the other. And within the context of Codex, I believe we have that here. So what we are sitting, maybe it wasn't intentional, you put us over on this side of the room as the risk assessors, and then we have the risk managers here. So we thank you for that comment, but we do consider those things when we're making recommendations and putting the science forward for the risk managers in the room to make the decisions that are based on the science. So, thank you.
Thank you. And we have New Zealand. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, very interesting discussions, and it'll be interesting to see which way it goes. I agree that the direction you're talking about is what we need to do to be able to prove that these products are safe, and to make sure that we can do it safely. And it was interesting listening to Jeff's comments about we can produce report after report after report, large reports about safety. But what does the actual public trust in the end? And just thinking about it, they perhaps don't read all those large reports. But if we come down to something like putting together a Codex food hygiene guide that captures all that, it is something simple, it is something that is driven by the best science, it's driven by the best regulators, and that breaks it down to its simplest points. But I was actually wondering one thing. You know, when Jeff, you talked about irradiation, and there are still a lot of people out there that don't trust irradiation for whatever reason. It hasn't been shown to be unsafe. We have a Codex document. You know, there's hundreds of documents out there about irradiation being safe, and we have a Codex guide for irradiating foods. We've got many, many documents out there about the safety of cell-based foods already. It seems if we do a Codex guide on cell-based foods, do you think that will be, I'm not going to say sufficient to get the trust of all out there, or will it really help us to get that message across and to assist regulators, industry, consumers to be able to produce and to be able to be assured that cell-based foods are safe? It's a difficult question to answer, I know, but I believe it's the best way to go, because there isn't any other way to go, because there will be those that will never, ever believe that it's safe and can't be done safe. But we need to be able to do that in a harmonised way that we've done for every other food that we've produced, and to take all of that science, put it together and summarise that in some very, very structured, harmonised, agreed procedures. And that's probably the only way that we can do it.
I think our Codex Secretariat want to reply to this intervention.
Already? I didn't know this. Thank you so much for organizing this sad event. It's very informative. Actually, I have a question. I think because cell-based food has been commercialized in some countries, and I think normally at a national level, when you allow one special type of food to be commercialized, you must need to go through very strict assessments and also establish their own standard or own legislation. My question is, have you ever studied the difference for regulation on this regard? I mean, you know, Codex, of course, one goal is to address emerging and new food safety issue. Another target is to harmonize standards or food legislation. I just want to know from the regulatory control point of view, is there any difference based on your understanding? Because this is the reality. Nowadays, we have cell-based food available in market and also available in some countries. Thank you. If you can help me solve my puzzle, I would appreciate. Thank you.
So in terms of regulation, our colleague Masami Takushi within this technical working group She has listed the countries that already have regulations in place to manage this this type of question. I think there was a CRD submitted, but I can check if there is a CRD submitted in the previous committees. But I know that there was a compilation of all the regulations in place by several countries, and I think this kind of information could be helpful in the future to share and to see the similarities and also the differences that could be an obstacle for the commercialization of this country, of this type of food.
Thank you, Dr. Marta. I see that it's already 45 and we are running out of time, so I take the last question from Italy.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing this side event, and thanks to all the speakers. I have a very quick question. I think it won't take much long. So in order to understand what we are really talking about, I wanted to know if you can provide some data about the quantities on national markets that are marketed in national markets at present, and about the quantities on international market, considering that this kind of information is also very relevant in Codex when discussing about prioritizing new work in case. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this question. I think we can go on this discussion in the P working group on the new work proposals, because you're asking for the information about the market, right? Like the national market or the international market. And I remember we do also have another question from New Zealand about what is the truly safe, whether we can ensure or that people believe what we say safe is really safe. So we bear this question in mind, and with that because we're running out of time, I think it's good time that we finish this, conclude this panel discussion and also conclude the side event. Thank you very much. I think we will go on the dialogue and our collaboration. Thank you.